Oh, it looks like we have some great guests here. Welcome, everybody. Over the next hour, we will explore two IGI Global published books, one called International Student Engagement in Post-Secondary Education, and another one called Belonging, Identity, and Student Development in International Student Experiences. I'm joined by several of our book authors who will present a summary of their chapter, followed by a panel discussion. So let me begin by introducing our speakers. So here we are. First, my name is Clayton Smith. I'm a full professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Windsor in Canada. I've held academic and enrollment leadership positions at 4 post-secondary institutions in the United States and Canada, most recently serving as vice provost at the University of Windsor. My research includes international student engagement, promising practices for teaching international students, student mentoring of teacher candidates, and strategic enrollment management. Next, Dr. Shami, and I hope I pronounced your last name right, Aramhatas, did I get that right? Okay, is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Victoria within the Department of Educational Psychology and Leadership Studies. Her scholarship draws on critical race theory and decolonial frameworks, focusing on internationalization, racialization, and equity in higher education. Her work critically examines the experiences of racialized international students, interrogating institutional ED-ID practices, international student mobility, transnational hierarchies, and the politics of belonging. Her areas of concentration also include teacher attrition, epistemic violence and curriculum studies, and the role of policy in shaping educational inequities. Dr. Haramahata's research contribute to broader conversations on global higher education, social justice, and educational transformation, with particular attention to disrupting neo-colonial, neoliberal, and exclusionary logics within contemporary academic institutions. Welcome. Next, we have Dr. Alison Emer, and she is an associate professor at the Fraser Faculty of Education at Ontario Tech University here in Canada. As a sociolinguist, she teaches and researches in the area of second language acquisition, language as a marker of cultural identity, intergenerational language transmission, and diaspora language maintenance. She coordinates the International Graduate Program in Education with students from over a dozen different countries. And welcome to you. And I don't see yet Professor Mia, but I'm going to read his introduction and hopefully he'll be joining us shortly. Professor Dr. Mohammed Hanan Mia is a professor at Bangladesh Maritime University and an adjunct professor at Ragamati Science and Technology University in Bangladesh. He is an interdisciplinary researcher and academic with over 25 years of experience in higher education, research, and academic leadership. His scholarly interests include leadership, Islamic education, higher education, sustainability, and research methodology, with a strong emphasis on international collaboration and socially meaningful scholarship. It's been my pleasure to work with Dr. Hanan Mia right here at the University of Windsor for the last year or so. Next, we have Dr. Harika Rao. She is the Associate Dean in the College of Business and Management at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida, where she leads academic quality, accreditation, assurance of learning, faculty development, and strategic initiatives. She is an IACBE Executive Committee member and site visitor with extensive experience in continuous improvement and business education accreditation. Dr. Rao's research focuses on student engagement and success in higher education, with particular interest in international student experiences, gamification and educational technology, assurance of learning, assessment, artificial intelligence in higher education, and leadership development. She's the author of several books and numerous scholarly publications, and regularly presents at national and international conferences on topics related to accreditation, teaching excellence, student success, and innovative practices in higher education. And welcome to you. Dr. Rebecca Stroud is certified K-12 teacher and researcher of comparative and international education, policy, and leadership. Rebecca's research includes a cluster of comparative and international educational leadership and teaching studies, advancing inclusive practices in education in globalized contexts, and some social work studies seeking to advance school-based youth homelessness prevention. She's currently an assistant professor at Wilfrid Laurier University, also in Canada, in the International Education Studies program. Her theoretical work aims to advance understanding of policyscape of inclusive international education, educator acculturation, and arts-based qualitative research method. She's a mentor to several graduate students and early career teachers. Welcome to all of you. Those who are visiting with us today out in that cyberspace, you're welcome to put your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll respond to them at the conclusion of the panel discussion. So now let me provide some background on our book project. The project grew out of discussions in our International Student Engagement and Higher Education Research Group as we explored the different approaches post-secondary institutions and instructors take to engage in international students in learning. With 13 researchers from Bangladesh, Canada, China, France, Germany, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the United Kingdom, we wanted to explore how engagement varies across institutional and cultural contexts so that our scholarship and practice would benefit from a more global view. Given the impressive number of chapters we received from 54 authors worldwide, and in consultation with our IGI Global colleagues, we decided to split the book into two books. As the proverb, "It takes a village," suggests, I want to acknowledge the incredible support we've received from our authors, reviewers, and the IGI Global staff. I remain humbled by their passion and enthusiasm for international student success as they navigate a challenging world. Across the two books, we shared many diverse perspectives. These include ethical spaces of becoming, inclusive environments, academic misconduct, African international student development, relational, micro and macro interactions, shared responsibility, sociocultural ecosystems, conditional belonging for racialized international students, social engagement, and wellness. And several new theoretical lenses emerged over the course of the two books, and they include these. And I'm not giving you the ones that are already known to the world. These are the new ones that we were hearing about. Feminist pedagogy. Wrote that one with one of my doctoral students. Institutional responsibility, linguistic hospitality, social participation, sociocultural ecosystems, shared responsibility, human-centered approaches, living in the in-between, and the meso-level. The book produced an international student engagement framework, which you can see in front of you here, and it was adapted from the work of Ella Kahu and Karen Nelson. It shows how structural and psychosocial influences, compounded by students' willingness to communicate and the disruptions that affect them, overall affect the educational macro, meso, and micro interface that really is about where we focus in engagement, resulting in both immediate and long-term outcomes. And while it's complex, it shows the many factors that our students face as they engage in active learning in our colleges and university. And you will find this at the conclusion of both books. And now we're going to move on to hearing a little bit about some of our chapters. So let's go ahead and do that. So here's the first book we'll look at. It's called International Student Engagement in Post-Secondary Education. It comes at it more from an academic perspective. What are the things we can do in and around the classroom? Oops, there we go. And so first we turn to Dr. Rao for a summary of her chapter, Enhancing International Student Success in U.S. Higher Education, Academic Experiences, Student Characteristics, and the Engagement Imperative. Over to you, Dr. Rao.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'd like to start off with that. I know everybody's in different time zones, so we definitely appreciate that. It's been a pleasure working with some of the authors and obviously with Dr. Smith and the IGI team. I promise that although the title of my chapter is quite lengthy, it's quite entertaining to actually read through the chapter. So the core reason for why this book is a calling to me, or the reason for me to kind of look into this chapter, was because we are a very international school, and we get students from different walks of life, different ways of how they are culturally perceiving their life here, and how we are perceiving the academic pillar of supporting them through the co-curricular components. So if we go to the next slide, it'll kind of sort of give us a little engagement in terms of how this entire chapter is presented. So my lens of working through this particular chapter was through a 3-pillar lens of making sure that we do the academic engagement piece, obviously, to be inclusive in terms of pedagogy, to have different types of language enabled embedded support. And this was important because we, irrespective of where we teach and, undergraduate, graduate, or different accrediting bodies, we do have some outcomes, and we have to be in compliance with the accrediting and the assessment policies. So that was one of the pillars. The second pillar, which personally for me is the most important pillar as for international students, is the social engagement piece. So while the curriculum piece is always, they're all hands on deck, we are doing different things as faculty members, I think the social engagement also kind of sort of falls in between the academic and the co-curricular component of campus. So this particular pillar focuses on peer mentoring, which is a faculty-led initiative. So we pair students up with, students who are either graduating or about to graduate, or are student champions on our campus. There's a lot of leadership opportunities where students can grow and make new friends, and obviously looking for different campus activities that we could do. So from the College of Business and Management, we do offer several programs. This is outside of obviously what the Center for Student Involvement and the co-curricular partners on campus do. So our focus is, or this chapter basically focuses on belonging. I think for me, ownership is key. So, do I feel the ownership of being here? Do I have something that I should really care for? Social integration, and obviously the cultural competence. So that's the second pillar that this chapter focuses on. And the third pillar, which is, I think, irrespective of whether we're international students or adults or faculty or, doing different things, I think the psychological engagement, where we also focus on, or this particular chapter focuses on, just the overall well-being of students, and empowering them with different ways, and having toolkits on resilience, whether it's they're navigating through the smallest issue of compatibility in their dorm rooms, or not being able to communicate the right way with the faculty member about APA format or the MLA format. So it's all of the psychological engagement which really helps us build the more culturally responsive support, both as on the academic side as well as the the student life side. And the overall goal of this particular chapter is to build a successful framework within the resources that our institutions can provide, so as to enable our students and reinforce the idea of, hey, your well-being is important. And we absolutely more than 100% care for you, being here with us and having chosen us as your institution, and also being a self-advocate for the issues and concerns. So we do have a lot of support that we give our faculty and students in terms of how they can collaborate. Quickly to the next slide, this particular chapter also kind of sort of goes into 6 different institutional priorities. These priorities are based off of what the mission and the vision is for my institution, but it's very similar and easily, something that can be replicated or duplicated depending on how and where the position of your institution is. But the focus is, priority is obviously making sure that there is a strategic orientation and there is a way for us to transition into all of these programs, whether it's training faculty or students or staff members. And then I think just the core of the entire conversation with international students is making them know that there's a purpose of social integration and why there's an importance in community building. So actively promoting holisticness in terms of their both academic learning as well as their well-being initiatives. And the last one, which is extremely important, is obviously focusing on assessment data, like, getting feedback from students as to whether they liked a particular program or particular event or a particular guest speaker. So this way we can tie it back to, okay, this is working and this is not working. And it's going to help us kind of prioritize how we take care of our students. So this way we have a better fulfilled and a happy campus overall for the academic years to come ahead. Those are my tips. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. Next up, we have Dr. Emer talking about her chapter, which is called The Collective Engagement Framework, Rethinking Academic Misconduct Among International Students in Canada. Dr. Emer, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I want to just first acknowledge my co-author, Professor Stacey Gibson, who was not able to be here today. She teaches in the Ontario College system. I teach at the university level, and we were interested in looking at engagement across both sorts of post-secondary education. So what we were looking to explore was the reflexive relationship between the lived reality of international students, and we know what that's like. We know that that includes acculturation, language barriers, working long hours to pay exorbitant tuition fees, some cases parenting, in some cases housing issues. So we know that the lived experiences of international students can include a number of challenges. We wanted to explore how that lived reality impacted their capacity to engage in their academic experiences, and borrowing from what we've just heard from my colleague, the sense of ownership. So the engagement and the sense of ownership in their learning, and then in turn, how that impacts their ability to comply with academic integrity policy. So I want to just start by saying, or I guess by reminding all of us that when our to-do list exceeds the number of hours in the day, when we have time poverty, when we have competing demands on our emotional energy, our cognitive energy, our physical energy, we look for shortcuts. And what I want to just discuss here is a way of looking at taking those shortcuts as a survival strategy for international students, rather than something that we want to take a punitive approach to. So just before we switch to look at the next slide, I just want to say that we were very intrigued by the components of engagement, because that we saw so much research that linked engagement with investment and ownership and compliance with academic integrity. So we wanted to understand what the components of engagement were. We looked at a number of models. We looked at the National Survey of Student Engagement, which is what's used at in Ontario, the Community College Survey of Student Engagement. Both of those don't discriminate between domestic and international students. We then looked at the socio-ecological model, which in fact is intended to include a focus on international students. But we still felt there were some shortcomings. We still felt that that an engagement model really needed to take into account various levels of responsibility for the stakeholders. So I'm going to go ahead and ask if we can look at the next slide. We came up with the collective engagement framework. And so on the left-hand side, you will see the domains. We had a total of 4 domains. So on this slide, we're just looking at the first 2, academic growth and social constructivist learning. We defined those domains, and you can see the definitions there. And where our model differed differs from others is that we then considered the 4 stakeholders. So to whom does it matter whether international students are engaged? And we decided that it mattered to the international students themselves. It mattered to the institution who recruited them and for whom budgets are heavily dependent upon international student fees. We decided that it mattered to the instructor. And for those of us who teach, we know that it's teaching is much more pleasant when your students are engaged. And we decided that it mattered to domestic peers as well. So we looked at those 4 stakeholders' level of responsibility for international student engagement across the 4 domains. So we had academic growth, social constructivist learning, belonging and connecting, and then the visibility and relevance and uptake of institutional supports. And we'll look at those remaining 2 domains on the next slide in a moment. But what I'd like you to see here is that if you think of academic growth, for example, as the ability to grasp complex ideas, to engage in critical thinking and synthesizing, goal setting, ethical reasoning, etc., we saw the instructor as having the primary role, so the greatest level of responsibility for the international students' academic growth. Academic growth, again, being one component of international student engagement. And we felt that way because the instructor is, in fact, responsible for the course outline, the curriculum, the instructional design, etc. Likewise, we felt the international student had the next level of responsibility in their own academic growth. We felt the institution had the next level of responsibility in providing faculty development initiatives and learning skills supports for students, and then that domestic peers had the least responsibility in this domain for the academic growth of international students. And so we did that across the 4 domains. We kind of titrated the level of responsibility that each of those 4 stakeholders had with respect to international student engagement within that domain. So again, the stakeholders are the instructors, the international students themselves, the institution, and the domestic peers. And you'll see that the level of responsibility changes across the 4 domains. Maybe we'll have a look at the next slide now. So in these remaining 2 domains, belonging and connecting, we have in the institution right at the top. So with the greatest level of responsibility for creating an inclusive campus climate. And that includes things like arranging scheduling so that international students are on campus during the day while their domestic peers are coming and going in the hallways and the coffee shops, etc., and in the library. Likewise, the visibility, relevance, and uptake of institutional supports is also, we felt, the primary responsibility of the institution. So with domestic peers having a lower level of responsibility across each of the 4 domains, but still having a level of responsibility, whether it's identified as such or not, in a social constructivist classroom environment, domestic peers really are the way that international students learn to understand the academic culture of the host country in which they are studying. So this was our contribution within this chapter, is to consider the roles of the stakeholders in achieving engagement for the international students, because they are at significantly greater risk of making a decision to take a shortcut that could get them into a lot of trouble, taking a shortcut that could result in a punitive action by the university. And for that reason, we're looking at kind of a reframing of academic integrity as not a moral failing, but rather a choice to take a shortcut, which actually impedes the learning process. So we were looking at how to improve engagement so that, in fact, the students are invested in their own learning. And that's it, Dr. Smith, for our chapter.
Thank you, Dr. Emer. Wonderful. Next, we're going to go to our second book, which is called Belonging, Identity, and Student Development in International Student Experience. And this, we're going to take a little bit more of a look at the social environment that our students engage in. So first up, we're going to turn this over to Drs. Aramhatas and Stroud, who will share a summary of their chapter, Hypervisible in Branding Yet Invisible in Practice, Conditional Belonging of Racialized International Students at 2 Ontario Universities. Dr. Stroud.
Hi, Shami, did you want to take this one?
Yeah. Yes, of course. Thank you. I think this is a heavily curated, book, and we're happy to be one of the authors on this chapter. So together with my co-author, Dr. Stroud, what we did is we examined international student engagement during a shift in Canadian international education. So for those of us who are in this context in January 2024, trying to bring you all back a bit, Immigration Minister Mark Miller announced a two-year cap which is projected to reduce new study permit approvals to approximately 360,000 students, which is a 35% decrease from 2023. So against this, very, fleeting and increasingly restrictive policy landscape, we asked ourselves what engagement and belonging actually means for racialized international students who are navigating higher education institutions. So I'm going to pass this over to Rebecca. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So our chapter begins with the critical question about how racialized international students experience and negotiate academic and social engagement, inclusion, and belonging. And so, as Dr. Aramhatas has already mentioned, the policy landscape has dramatically changed over the past few years. So the critical question that we pose is complicated by that changing policy landscape. Our broad research question was, what does it mean for international students to belong at university? So we have a more fulsome question up there on the slide, but that's in a nutshell what the broad question was. So to do that, we conducted a small comparative study at 2 Ontario universities involving 11 racialized international students in Ontario. One of these two institutes, they're both universities. One of these is a research intensive university and the other one is more of a community institution. And we sought to learn about the students' lived experiences and how they negotiated relationships and belonging. And you can see on the slide how we parsed out that broad research question into 3 sub research questions, which were how do racialized international students perceive, interpret, and embody engagement in their academic and social environments? In what ways do institutional policies, practices, and campus cultures shape their capacity to integrate, persist, and to flourish? And finally, how do international students navigate, resist, or internalize moments of exclusion and conditional inclusion within institutions that claim to champion equity and diversity? And so for the next slide, I'll pass it back to you, Shami.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so across the 2 universities, which we looked at as separate cases, we've identified 3 interconnected processes through which belonging became apparently conditional. So pedagogical disconnection really captured how linguistic and racialized hierarchies, limited faculty relationality, and even uneven recognition of students' knowledge could lead to academic disengagement. The other one was cultural isolation, right, and peer segregation, which showed up that simply occupying a diverse campus did not guarantee meaningful intercultural relationships. Peer boundaries, are in different residential areas and commuter environments really could play a pivotal role in reducing social disengagement. And now finally, the last one I want to really hearken on is performative inclusion, which very much exposed the gap between universities' stated commitments to diversity and the material, pedagogical, and relational support students actually experienced. So what is significant is their convergence. So across both the universities or institutions, racialized international students could be hyper visible, within institutional imaginaries, yet materially and relationally peripheral in practice. So in other words, there were very evident and visible enough to signify diversity, globality, and institutional success, but not always enough in a way for their exclusion to register as an institutional failure. So this is what we describe as it's an institutional production of conditional belongings. I'm going to pass this over to you, Rebecca. Thank you. Next slide, please.
All right, so just to wrap it all up, engagement and experiences of holistic belonging may be addressed for better outcomes, but this will require institutional commitments that look beyond recruitment and brochure performativity. While belonging is a subjective experience of each individual, it is also institutionally curated, supported, and mediated. So by considering how to include more holistic belonging, the voices and identities of international students, in particular, those who experience the most barriers, such as racialized international students, institutions may work toward creating better structures that result in true relationality and inclusion. Ultimately, the test of belonging as a subjective one shall be determined by the students. And lastly, I would just say that our small study, informs future studies and areas for programmatic change to improve the experiences of belonging for students in higher education. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. And now off to our last chapter. It's with Dr. Mohammed Hanan Mia from Bangladesh Maritime University. And the title is Reframing International Student Engagement, Global Perspectives on Student Belonging. Over to you, Dr. Hanan.
Yes, Prof. Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof.
Dr. Hanan, you have a little bit of background noise. Is there a way we can manage that?
Actually, the place is a little bit crowded.
Okay, that's okay.
Okay, I can loudly speak, Prof. I
That's
can
better.
loudly speak, Prof. Okay.
Right. Wonderful.
Good morning. Good morning, Professor Dr. Clayton and everyone. And thanks to the IGI Global for hosting today's lunch webinar and all. So my topic, my title, Reframing International Student Engagement from Matrix to Meaning. The title of my talk today is The Illusion of Disengagement. I chose that phrase deliberately because much of what institutions label as disengagement among international students is not a lack of effort or interest. It is a mismatch between how engagement is measured and how it is actually lived and experienced by students from different cultural backgrounds over the next few minutes. I want to talk through why the illusion persists, that what a more human-centered picture of an engagement looks like. Human-centered picture of engagement looks like. Reframing engagement. Reframing engagement and integrated lens. To move beyond surface level metrics, my chapter draws on 5 theoretical lenses that together form an integrated framework. First, socio-cultural theory, which reminds us that engagement is always shaped by context and cultural code. What counts as participation in one culture may look completely different in one another. Second, student agency theory, which centers choice and adaptation. Students aren't passive recipients of institutional programming. They actively negotiate how, when, and whether to engage. Third, engagement as social practice, a matter of negotiation and performance, a fixed thing. Fourth, intersectionally, which asks us to look at layered identity and power. A student experience of engagement is shaped simultaneously by nationality, language, gender, and more. And fifth, if the center is synthesis engagement as human-centered relational experience. Fifth, the center is synthesis engagement as a human-centered relational experience, not a checkbox, but a relationship.
Dr. Hanan, do you need me to advance the slides?
Yes, yes. Can you repeat? Slide 3. Why one size fits all faiths? Why one size fits all faiths? This framework matters because a one size fits all approach to engagement simply doesn't hold up across contexts. In many global north institutions, we see what I call polar explosion, transnational models where structural inclusion exists on paper, but pedagogical belonging is largely absent. In East Asian countries, context, silence and hierarchy are often expressions of cultural respect. Yet these same behaviors get realized by Western-centered participation things and full and individual participation. In sub-Saharan Africa, we often see strengths in relational peer and networks sustain engagement, student engagement, even where formal institutional systems fall short. The one insight they ties all of this together is this hidden curriculum, the unwritten, unspoken rules of academic life is the primary barrier to student engagement. And faculty-student relationships are the pedagogical pivot point that can either reinforce that barrier or help students navigate through it. Number 4, slide 4. Typology of engagement practices. Slide number 4. So what does meaningful engagement actually look like in practice? My chapter proposes a typology across 4 dimensions: institutional practices, policy reform, mental health strategies, advisory structures, pedagogical practices, humanized teaching, responsive curriculum design, and diverse assessment methods that don't privilege one culture style of participation over another. Community-based practices, peer mentoring, cultural dialogue, and social networks. And The intersection of all three created equity, focused, culturally responsive approaches. Practices that don't just add international and students' engagement into existing systems, but are built together with them. Slide number 4. From metrics
Sorry, we are at time. We're going to have to
Yeah.
go on to the next question. So sorry.
Hello? Yes, Prof. Professor Clayton is with. Yes, Prof.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Okay,
Okay.
Prof. Okay, Prof.
So let's
Okay.
move on. Let's move on. First of all, thank our authors. That sharing was wonderful, and there are lots more chapters as well. But our first question I have here is, what about international student engagement caught your attention when you were considering submitting your research for publication in our books? So who would like to jump in first? What caught your attention?
Dr. Smith, I'll go in first, if that's okay with all
You
of
go
my
right ahead.
co-presenters. I think one of the interesting aspects about being an international student myself, because I studied in different countries, so it was quite fascinating from the student side, obviously, to get the cultural adjustment, and you got to recalibrate every time you get into a new country. So just from the student perspective, I had many stories that I was trying to understand as and when I became a faculty member, to see how things are changing with different generations. So for me personally, it was a great full circle moment to just be an international student in different countries, and then come back and also be able to teach at an international institution, for sure.
Thank you for that. Somebody else?
I can
Rebecca?
jump in. I was going to just say that what caught my attention was coming to realize the extent of the challenges in the lived experiences of international students. And I think in the first year that we ran our program, we had 2 babies being born. We had 1 hospital stay. We had a house on fire. We had students who, when they made arrangements to come here, planned to live with families, not realizing that it was an hour-and-a-half train ride from campus, for example, and wanting to honor their work commitments because they needed the finances in order to pay their tuition, but having bosses who would say, I need you to stay late, and late meant not being able to get to class. So just recognizing the challenges of staying engaged and staying connected to your academic pursuit when you have all of these other responsibilities just involving paying the rent and paying the tuition fees. That really struck me as it struck me that we as instructors really need to have a greater understanding of those challenges, and also to have a lot of grace for those students in terms of hard deadlines and those kinds of things. So that was the big thing for me, Dr. Smith, was the extent of the challenges of the lived experiences of international students.
Absolutely. Does someone else want to jump in on this question?
I will jump in and to add to what Dr. Emer has eloquently already conveyed, is that I think that there needs to be a lot of grace, and having formally taught and alongside her and having the same students, there's a lot of micro level challenges that us as educators sometimes happen to hear in passing, and we're able to intervene. But I think the big picture, when we look at international student experiences, specifically belonging and engagement, much of these conversations do not reach international offices, and they work in silos. And I think there's a piece about international leadership that is somewhat seemingly lost in this infrastructure of racialized international student supports, or just general international student supports. And yes, so I think that I think we need to look at other stakeholders who should be here, and perhaps have internal studies within these institutions that collect data from our students so that we can better support the students who we are hosting the following years. So Rebecca, if you have something to also add, feel free to do so.
Well, I would like to just give a shout out to some acculturation research. I know that we'd like to move on to the next question, but I did have one finding in my doctoral study on educator acculturation that really stood out when we were doing this study, and that would be to look at some of the positive ways in which acculturation is supported. And there was one positive outlier in the findings from my doc study. And I think that would be a good conversation to have, to reach these international offices and see if we could operationalize that for better outcomes for international students. But I think the plan is to move on to the next discussion question. Is that right?
Yeah, let me just quick comment. There are chapters that talk about micro, macro, and meso levels and way in we can in work toward engagement. So I'll leave that for you to read about, but there are some chapters that go broader than what we've been speaking about here today. So for the next question, how might student engagement differ? How might it differ for international versus domestic students? We talk a lot about domestic student engagement, particularly with the NESE surveys and the other literatures that we often read about. But what's the difference? And can you talk a little bit about that? Somebody who would like to jump in?
Okay, so I'll jump in here because that's kind of where I was going with the last question and my acculturation study is that, and both Drs. Rao and Dr. Emer have discussed, all of the background activities that international students have to juggle that include academic work, but also are beyond academic work. So the personal acculturation. And so what I think, I think that domestic students, they're not necessarily navigating those extra pieces and may not be on the radar that these extra embedded pieces of acculturation are a part of an international student's daily life. And so the challenge, I think, is how do we bring in positive mechanisms. I think maybe Dr. Rao was talking about one. I haven't read your chapter though yet, so I can't really comment on that. But I think the challenge then is how do we bring in these, how do we operationalize measures that can create better outcomes? And I did come across one, like I mentioned, one finding, which was, it was an international school, but their students were globally mobile. So they weren't serving a predominantly domestic student body. And they had a really neat program of onboarding and induction that went beyond just the mechanics of learning how to do something professionally, academically in this context. And they went into the social and the personal. And the finding was that it enhanced thriving. So things like that, I think, would be a good discussion point to explore to see if we can operationalize that on our campuses.
Thank you, Rebecca. Do we have one more comment on this question?
I'll piggyback on the last two discussions. I think one of the important aspects that was brought up was that we all work in silos. So I think just similar to how we as adults think we work in silos, I think international students, when they come in, there's this whole thing that, oh my God, I'm by myself. I don't know what to do. So I think engagement definitely differs, as we all know. And obviously, to Dr. Stroud's point, there are different barriers for both domestic and international students, but more for international students where they seek or they look for some sense of belonging. They're looking for faculty members who look like them to kind of make that cultural connection, which again defeats the purpose of them actually coming to an international country. So it becomes a cycle of interesting things and how we are perceiving engagement. But just one last point on operationalization. We have this whole, and in my chapter, I write about the movie night and all of that. The movie night, only domestic students show up. So there was this entire situation around, why aren't international students showing up? And international students don't know that for a movie night, you actually just bring your blanket, your cozy, whatever it is. So I think also educating and not assuming students know everything becomes a huge component of just from our side, because we, as again, adults working as in silos and in different offices, we assume, students will like the movie night and the popcorn. But I think the onus is also on the institutions and us as faculty members that, hey, movie night is you bring your cozy stuff, relax, enjoy, there's no homework, and there's no attendance. So I think there are multiple pieces to this.
Okay, thanks for that. Now we're going to move on to our third question. How is student engagement influenced by culture or country of origin? Who would like to speak to that?
Well, Dr. Smith, I guess I'm stating the obvious here, but as a student from a culture that aligns readily with Western values, Western approaches to academic culture, will likely have less acculturation challenges in the West, for example. So a student coming from a country that has English as a first language, for example, or as one of the official languages, are going to have far less acculturation challenges. I'm thinking, for example, of this past year, we had an international student who was American from just south of the border, for example. So that student's experience of engagement when English was their first language, they were obviously very comfortable in Canadian culture, felt very, had no challenges with respect to belonging or with academic culture, for example. So I think those students who are coming from very different cultural backgrounds and different linguistic backgrounds, languages that, for example, don't use the Roman alphabet, they're going to have more distractions. They're going to carry a greater cognitive load, which is going to make student engagement in their learning even more challenging.
Thanks for that. I think what I'm going to do next is turn to our questions from our audience. And let me see if I can do that quickly here. Oop, too many. And the wrap up. First of all, we have a question here from one of my students, Shravya Garajan, and she writes, what practical strategies can institutions adopt to bridge the gap between institutional perceptions of belonging and international students' actual experiences and perceptions of belonging? So what practical strategies? Who would like to take that one?
Well, I'll jump in just quickly to say that one strategy that I've seen at one of the faculties that I've worked at is having the dean and faculty members invite students to informal conversations at lunchtime and to invite students to speak about experiences, make requests, raise issues arising. When I did my doctoral degree, I attended some of these. And when I did my degree, I was also the graduate student ambassador. So sometimes students would raise these issues. Sometimes they would come to me and ask me to raise these issues. But I think starting with opportunities to listen to the experiences and then respond to those experiences.
Okay, thanks for that. We have another one here that Genevieve has brought to our attention on behalf of Stevens Thungo, ODL coordinator at Lunar in Malawi, and he's a prospective PhD student. Actually, he and I are in conversation. It says, your work on international student belonging, identity, and engagement raises an interesting question for me. How do these dynamics translate to learners who never set foot on campus? That's the gap I'm curious about. Could AI-enabled support help foster that same sense of connection, although in distance learning? Who would like to take this one?
I'll take this one because I boasted about how I enjoy writing about AI and higher education. I think it's kind of an interesting situation because when you're looking at AI, we do have a lot of AI videos on virtual campus tours and all of that. There's a lot of positive feedback that we get from students, especially when they're looking at, the experience of being on campus without being on campus. So there's definitely a sense of connection with AI. However, on the flip side of, okay, great, you know where the campus is, you're basically being you and walking on campus virtually through the online platform. But in my personal opinion, I don't think AI enabled support will work great if it's a distance learning situation for international students in terms of a chatbot. So our institution is very specific on chatbots. We don't have chatbots. There is someone human who is responding to every single question. So AI is useful in certain aspects with distance learning, especially whether it's international or domestic students who cannot travel with all of the changing dynamics. But definitely there has to be a human behind the chatbot if we are using AI. That would be my the philosophy around how we use AI.
Thanks for that. I'm next going to just move to introducing Genevieve Robinson. She's the Managing Director of Marketing at IGI Global, and she'll tell us a little bit more about the work of IGI Global. Genevieve.
Hi, I'm Genevieve Robinson. I'm the Managing Director of Marketing for IGI Global. I've been working here for a couple years now, and I love working with researchers around the world to promote their research and to promote the brand that I work for. But ultimately, I am here to support the academic community in finding new research, new content. So we will be sure to communicate with you after this event ends, providing you with the recording of the event, as well as information about both publications that have been discussed today, ways that you can take discounts for those publications if you need a personal copy, as well as ways that you can recommend this publication to your institution's library so that they can add this as a resource. There's a lot of different options for how this can be done, and we like to handle that as an individual basis. So if you have any questions about where these books can be purchased, and what the publishing process is about, if you're interested in publishing something of your own with us, feel free to respond to that follow-up email with your questions.
Thank you, Genevieve. So lastly, we want to thank you for joining us, and that it's been our honor and pleasure to share our two books and the work that we're doing in the student engagement. And I have to put a little plug in to one of the things that I'm thinking about next is what are the perspectives of people who live in the global South about international engagement for international students who are on their turf. If you're in China, or if you're in Malaysia, or if you're in Colombia, is international student engagement different? And that's something that interests me next. So anyhow, if you're interested in that, be in touch. Otherwise, we wish you all the best and have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.